found something. We found something. We found something.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin,
I'm Jake.
and this is Movie Matters. Today we're talking about another movie from 1982, The Thing. John Carpenter, Kurt Russell, great cast, great movie. I've seen this movie like at least 20 times. It's so good.
Yeah, I haven't seen it that many, but I've seen it several times.
Did I introduce you to it?
I can't remember. There's a decent chance you did.
I think I did.
I think we watched it together for the first time I saw it, but I
Yeah.
can't remember for sure.
I've shown a lot of people this movie. I feel like I have a good recollection, like a memory of us watching it in in the basement in downtown Chicago. I feel like when I first showed you it.
I think so, yeah.
For our listeners out there and viewers, Jake and I have known each other since middle school. We went to college together in downtown Chicago, and we hung out even more so, I'd say, during college. And we just watched endless amounts of movies. And I showed Jake a lot of movies, and this I'm pretty sure was one of them. We just watched the trailer as we do before every episode, and we both were like, that trailer was great. Like, it's definitely the best one we've watched so far. It shows a lot. I said, I mentioned that to you before we started recording. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I liked how it like flashed through a bunch of the action in silence though.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty cool. It did some pretty cool things that are more like modern kind of techniques, I feel like, that you don't see in an 80s trailer typically, which is pretty cool to see, especially for this movie.
Yeah. And especially for early 80s, which is hilarious because we just did Blade Runner and we thought that was the worst trailer we'd ever seen.
Easily.
And this is the best trailer we've ever seen. And they came out literally like within a week of each other, which is funny. So speaking of that, I mean, we did mention it in our last video. Blade Runner came out right when E.T. came out. So did this. So Blade Runner and this movie made absolutely no money, but developed a cult following, have been re-reviewed later in their, years after their release, and have been reevaluated as classics. This movie and I'd say Blade Runner both have controversial endings and kind of ambiguous endings, which we'll get into, which I'm very excited about. But it's pretty sad that this movie made no money because it's incredible. Again, I have a friend that also, the same friend that I talked about in last episode, that didn't rate or didn't like Blade Runner, really didn't like this movie either, which is very interesting.
It's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Shout out Brandon if you listen to this one. The film's budget was very large for a horror movie. It was $15 million, which is larger than most horror movies out there. I mean, Carpenter did Halloween for $375,000, which is insane. And you had Friday the 13th, which came out 2 years prior, for $700,000. With this movie making no money, it kind of tanked Carpenter's career, which is pretty disappointing. He was set up to direct Firestarter from '84, but got kicked off the project because this movie failed, which pretty interesting. I mean, he's an epic filmmaker, and he's made some pretty awesome movies.
Halloween by itself is one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. So it's really surprising that the merits of this movie weren't seen within studios. It's kind of interesting.
I know.
It's
very interesting.
Sometimes the content doesn't really matter in the movie business. It's just how things perform at the box office.
Yeah, pretty disappointing. And it's interesting that they're overlooked because of their box office success or failure. With Blade Runner obviously being a masterpiece and it failing at the box office, the same thing with this one. They actually I reread some of my notes. Blade Runner and The Thing opened against each other,
Oh, okay.
but E.T. had come out a week prior.
So yeah.
And what's funny about that is E.T. I mean, E.T. won 4 Oscars. Blade Runner was nominated for 2, didn't win anything. This was not nominated for anything. But
visual effects,
I know
is
how.
a no-brainer. Like, I don't know.
Which I can't wait to get into those because there's some cool facts about those. It's interesting that both Blade Runner and The Thing are in IMDb's top 250, and E.T. is not. It's pretty funny.
Fair.
I mean, E.T.'s a good movie. I think we'll eventually do it. I like that movie, but it's more of a
overrated.
kids movie. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good movie, but like, yeah, it's a kids movie.
Yeah.
There's not like a whole bunch of substance beyond the plot of the movie, you know. We're like,
I get its commercial appeal versus Blade Runner and The Thing,
well,
though.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
But I mean, like we think of like the Academy Awards tries to recognize movies that are like art, you know,
Yeah.
which like Blade Runner and The Thing are
Yeah.
both much deeper than the surface level plots in either of those examples, you know.
Yeah.
Where E.T. is about a kid and an alien, and like you get what you know. There's not much beyond that.
Yeah. I've only seen like E.T. once or twice actually. I'm not seen it a bunch comparatively to Blade Runner and The Thing.
Yeah,
I've seen
same. Yeah.
It's more than my fingers on my hands. Yeah, John Carpenter took it pretty hard that the movie failed, especially from the negative criticism. It got a ton of like negative press. Again, I think
That's like unreal too.
I get it in '82 with the amount of violence and crazy effects and the blood and all that. It's over people's heads, and they just thought it was a gore fest and like too gross. I mean, a lot of movies in our day and age now, you know, the later 2000s is when gore started getting more popular, and I'd even argue that gore got more popular from the 80s movies. Evil Dead specifically, like Evil Dead 2, gore started to get more and more popular.
Yeah.
You know, gross out, body horror, freak out, stuff like that. You know, this movie is a remake too. It's a remake, The Thing from Another World, which I've never seen. That's from 1951. Have you seen it, Jake?
I haven't.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's much in common between them, if I'm remembering correctly.
They both take place in like a remote Arctic location, but they are different. And it's based on a short story called Who Goes There by science fiction editor John W. Campbell Jr. And this movie, The Thing, starts off with, you know, the credits, and then it does the Thing logo, which they actually copied the exact logo from The Thing from Another World, which is cool. Up there in the special features on the movie, the guy who created the title sequence talks about how he did it. He basically had like a fish tank with trash bags on it and like the title card, and he like burnt the trash bag so it opened up and showed The Thing.
So cool.
Very cool, very cool. Again, like movies don't do that these days. They don't do like pioneering, like interesting effects, I guess you could say.
It's just computers now.
Yeah, I get it. It's easier, you know.
Yeah.
But like again, I've said this. I said this earlier. I've seen this movie at least a dozen times. So this time I did it a little bit different, and I texted you about it and told you, I was like, "Hey, I'm watching this movie with the commentary on." I normally don't do that. I do enjoy commentary from time to time. Usually, I just want to enjoy the movie. I recently watched this movie I showed Daniel. He was the guy on our Once Upon a Time in America podcast. I showed him. He had never seen it. I showed him for the first time a couple months ago, like pretty recently. So I'm like, you know what? I want to get a little bit different perspective on it. So I decided to watch it with the commentary. Also, having watched the bonus features on Blade Runner, the Dangerous Days documentary, got me kind of inspired to dig a little even deeper into these movies and especially ones I've seen multiple times. So that's why I decided to watch the commentary, which I recommended. It was pretty interesting. They go over a lot of details. If you want the abridged version, just go through the IMDb trivia, and it's got all the same things they basically talk about. But it's interesting to hear. It's with Kurt Russell and Carpenter, and they're basically like smoking cigarettes, talking about how they're like, oh yeah, in the Antarctica set we didn't have any beer, so that kind of sucked, which is hilarious. Like, I bet they just had wild times. Apparently, in an interview, I think it was with Stephen Colbert. I could be wrong on this. I briefly saw this in the trivia, that he asked John Carpenter like how the shoot was, and he said, "Well, I don't want to say anything because all these guys are married." Basically, like they did some shit. They did some crazy shit for sure. Yeah, I mean the John Carpenter wanted to make a different type of horror movie, which you can tell from this. He wanted to make a movie that wasn't like Alien, ironically. He's like, watching that movie, I could tell there was a guy in that alien costume, and that bothered me. He just wanted to make something different, with like super intelligent guys, because these guys are in an Antarctica like facility. They're all like scientists. They all are smart, and they go up against an unstoppable alien, and that challenge in and of itself is very intriguing and breeds good plot. I love movies like this where it's, one pretty much one location. You've got some force that they're going up against. It's a group of people, and they're kind of getting picked off one by one. But this does it a little differently with the paranoia aspect to it, and the special effects are different. It's a different overall movie, and I feel like it's still original to this day. Ironic that it is a remake.
Right. Yeah. Like, what's really interesting about the way that this movie kind of functions is like it's really like an anti-slasher, where like in most slasher movies, it's a group of inexperienced or dumb kids that are usually, or like they're intoxicated or whatever, so they make bad decisions along the way and get picked off one by one, where this is like these guys are all like top of their field, like researchers, and they're all, like you said, extremely brilliant and smart and like experienced, and they keep making the right decisions and still keep losing the fight, which is very atypical for horror in general, and very cool, and why I think this movie is super compelling. And the other really key difference is like Carpenter doesn't hide anything in this movie. Like, right off the bat that this is an alien movie because there's a flying saucer in the opening credit. And then like they don't hide the thing from you. They show it in its like weird like half morphine state, like pretty plainly, so that you can see that it's like some fucked up like human thing, like which is also like very atypical of horror, where like usually they're hiding the monster from you for most of the movie. So like it's really, really cool. I think really did a lot for horror in general, like as a genre, and allowed for some like more creativity in horror movies.
Absolutely.
Because it's like you said earlier, this is a masterpiece horror movie. It's just, there's so many fantastic elements to it.
Yeah. One of those elements being the score, which John Carpenter usually does his own scores, but you've got the master Ennio Morricone,
So good.
who purposely made the score to be John Carpenter like, which is super badass. It's funny, like they didn't even ask, like John Carpenter wasn't asked to do the score, ironically, and it just so happened that Ennio Morricone was available, and that's one of Carpenter's favorite composers. So he's like, yeah, sign him up. Like, that's awesome. It's so good. The score, it's so good. That low
and, like,
bass.
Yeah, the bass, and like Carpenter's like really good at utilizing like modern instrumentation to create his like atmospheres. Like the Halloween theme song is like a synthesizer, kind of, and like synth heavy, and like, for what was it, 1978 that Halloween came out?
I think you're right.
Like was pretty cutting edge for that time. Like there's a lot of aspects to Halloween that are actually pretty 80s.
78
for having come out in the late 70s.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Morricone definitely took cues from Carpenter in the way it's done, but it's done masterfully, as Ennio Morricone always kind of does his scores. So
what's crazy is it was nominated for a Razzie. So do you know what the Razzie Awards are?
yeah, it's like the shittiest stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was nominated for Razzie for worst score. Like,
Which is
how?
like so wild. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, this movie was panned pretty heavily and people didn't like it when it first came out. So, I mean, I guess I get it, but still, it's so cool.
Yeah, I think this movie was just too far ahead of its time. Like,
Same
you
as
kind of
Blade
alluded
Runner.
to that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just like, I don't think, as Marty McFly would put it, like, I can tell you guys aren't ready for that, but your kids are gonna love it. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of the vibe of The Thing and Blade Runner. Like, it's just not, like, the people at that time, I think, were just not ready.
Yeah. That's so funny. That's a great point. And to do an 80s reference. That's great.
Yeah.
Genius, Jake. Well done. Well done, sir. Yeah, I mean, and the movie is unlikable because of certain things, and I get that. I mean, the beginning of the movie, it starts off with a dog getting shot at. Like, I mean, I'm a huge animal lover, and that's the one thing the animals in this movie don't fare very well.
Yeah, no.
And that it is hard to watch for me, and I'm sure other people. But in the commentary, you do learn that the American Humane Society was there the whole time and everything was kosher. So that's good news, at least. And, like, it's fake. It's a movie. So,
Yeah. But, like, that's one of the things that's kind of genius about the opening is that you go into it with this guy trying to shoot a dog, which is, like, not normal behavior. So, like, right at the start of the movie, you're kind of on edge. Like, what the hell's going on, Like, this is weird. Like, this isn't right, It really sucks you in, like, right away.
yeah, and then he shoots Bennings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he gets shot in the eye by Gary. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting opening. But again, it's like it sets the plot off right away. Then you also have, because it's like the whole team there, the American crew, if you will, they try and radio, and they're having issues with the radio. So it sets that up, which is really good writing, if you ask me. It's, you have all these people in a confined setting. Like I said, I love movies like that. You limit them with the radio. You limit their resources. They're in the middle of the cold, where it's, negative 30 degrees during the day, almost below 100 at night. Like,
there's a ticking clock because a storm is coming.
Yeah. And there's also the whole I have to save humanity aspect of it, where it almost has that Alien vibe, where the computer does the simulation of what happens if this alien takes over. It's almost straight from that, if you think
Yeah.
about it. And it's up to these guys to save the world. You know, there's the
Right.
stakes. There's large stakes here in this movie, and I love that. And it's entertaining, and all the characters are entertaining. They're not all necessarily likable, and the movie is very dreadful. There's not a lot of happiness in the movie. It's all pretty much dread and despair, but that's a horror movie for you, if you ask me.
Yeah, and like what's like another great aspect of the movie is the like heavy feeling of like hopelessness throughout the entire movie, which is also not super common in horror. Like usually there's like a little grain of hope that you can like kind of cling to throughout the movie that may or may not be like obliterated by the end, but like in this, like pretty early it's like they're fucked. Like there's like nothing they're gonna be able to do, and like Kurt Russell's even like, we're dead, so like we might as well just do our best to kill this thing and keep it from getting out of here. You know, like that's like halfway through the movies. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's very bleak, and like they establish that like hopelessness and helplessness like very early compared to most horror movies.
And I think that's exactly why it did not connect with audiences in '82, is because they weren't used to that. And yeah, again, it's not a happy movie. There's not a happy ending. It's and the effects are very grotesque. Again, I think that's exactly why audience didn't connect with it, and critics alike. So but the first effect in the movie is really cool. Where they go and inspect this Norwegian camp, Mac and Dr. Copper. They go and inspect it, and they see this guy who's committed suicide, like sliced his neck, and there's, you know, in his wrists, and there's blood running, and it's frozen, and that apparently was a rubber dummy. And it's funny because Kurt Russell is like, he's like, it looked so fake when he first saw it. But then on film, on camera, it looks completely different. Like, it still looks great and held up, especially with it frozen, the blood frozen. It's a really cool effect. Then, and so that set of the Norwegian camp is actually the set of the American camp. It's the same exact set. And it's after they blew it up at the end of the movie, they just reused that with it already blown up. And it was perfect. Made complete sense. They didn't have to blow things up twice, didn't have to do things twice. And it saves money, even though the budget was high.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then they get outside and they see for the first time this thing transforming, basically. And
like,
that thing is gnarly.
Frozen and like charred mid transformation.
Yes.
Like you get a glimpse of it there. I think the best glimpse you get is the two faces that are like kind of like stretching through each other.
Yeah.
But it's pretty short.
Until
like,
they
not
throw it on the
clear
table.
what's going on until then they just show you everything like
And
immediately
dissect.
after and rip it open. Yeah. Which is like, again, like very atypical for a horror movie, that like they're giving you all the information up front. And just like laying it all on the table.
Yeah, they're showing you the cards.
Right. And like in a lot of ways, I think it helps make this movie even more horrifying and scary. Because like once you figure out what's going on, at the same time that the characters do, which is pretty cool. It's like, oh, like there's like 9 dudes and any one of them could be one of these things, and like, it's like it hits you like a freight train.
Yeah,
it's just so cool. It's such a great way to like introduce the like monster element in like probably like the most terrifying way possible, which is that like it's in the room with them and no one knows
It's
who
seen
it
but
is.
unseen.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. Yeah, like you said, it's showing you it, and I love that aspect. This movie was a benchmark for special effects, especially for the industry. So Rob Bottin did the special effects for this. He did him on the Howling, which we need to watch. It's an 80s movie. He was only 22 years old when he did the special
Wow,
effects for
that's
this
nuts.
movie. Isn't that insane?
Yeah, I mean, and these are like some of the best effects of the 80s too.
Yeah,
It's nuts.
like of all time, honestly.
Yeah.
He was so dedicated to his work on this film that he became very ill with exhaustion, double pneumonia, and a bleeding ulcer for a
Oh,
22-year-old. And he had to be hospitalized because of the ulcer. And he also suffered from nightmares from creating the creatures, which makes sense. Yeah, he I mean, kudos to him for being only 22 years old and creating these effects. It's incredible. Then you get the dog transforming into the thing, which is absolutely terrifying and disgusting and
so
horrible.
wild.
Yeah, so apparently they had like a rubber dog, and then they had mechanics. A lot of these effects are created with people under the floor. It's a false floor, and they're using, it's more of puppets or animatronics, and they're controlling it, the arms and legs. And they did that like we talk about that in American Werewolf in London. They had that with the false floor with the transformation scene. And I mean, the effects of the dog just changing and then its head splitting open is fucking wild. Again, I think audiences were just like, oh my God, like, oh, they were appalled by this in 82.
So like putting myself in someone that was watching this for the first time in 82, this dog starts to transform, and your only reference point is probably Alien. So you're thinking that like the alien is going to rip itself out of the dog and be the alien or whatever, and like start unleashing hell or whatever. But it like flips that, and it's like, no, the dog is the thing. And like that's when its like skull is like looking around and like making noises and stuff after its face like peels back like a flower. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like what the
It's
hell?
a shock. Believe it or not, Stan Winston, who we know from Terminator fame, who did the effects for Terminator, he created that dog. But he went uncredited because he didn't want to take away from Bottin's work, which is super nice. In the closing credits, Stan Winston gets a shout out saying thank you. Yeah, that whole scene with the dogs and then they're shooting and the flamethrowers, it's very disturbing. And yeah, again, for animal lovers out there, I apologize. It's hard to watch, in my opinion. It's whenever my friends are like, "What do you think of The Thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, I love that movie, except for the dogs getting killed." I say that to everyone. I'm like, it's hard for me to watch. I'm a big animal lover, and
Some of them make it out, so it's not all bad.
2 of them, right?
I think 2 of them, yeah.
Yeah, but
then the doctor kills them both, I think.
I think so too. No, not the doctor. It is kind of the doctor. It's
The medical examiner.
Wilford Brimley,
guy,
his character.
Yeah.
What's his name? Blair.
Blair. Yeah.
Yeah. He kills him with an axe, which you see the aftermath of that, and that's not pretty either. And I'm not a fan of that. The spaceship reveal is pretty cool, where they, show that. So this was an all-male crew, an all-male cast. There was only technically one female in the crew, and she had to leave because she was pregnant. So like it's all males in this movie, and that kind of got some controversy a little bit as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's so well done. Then they dissect the thing after they burn it, and Wilford Brimley apparently loved doing that because he grew up as a farmer, and he's like, I dissected things all the time, so he was just all about it. And then you get that assimilation simulation where it says that, what it can take over and what it can do. And I like that whole, like, there's a lot of scenes where there's just people talking, and it's a lot of the crew, or a lot of the cast, excuse me. A lot of the cast just talking in one room, and it's like 10 guys. And Carpenter finds a way to make it super compelling and has good monologues and moves the story forward with these scenes, which is very tough to do. Very tough to do.
But like the way he like breaks those up too is really interesting. Where like they're almost, I mean, like throughout the movie they have regular like almost like team meetings, where like everyone kind of gathers and they're talking about stuff, and then there's a disturbance and they all have to run to whatever's going on. And that's what kind of like triggers the action in the movie. And like, it's a really cool mechanic to get everyone like mobilized, like all of the characters like moving and like doing stuff, from like in between the like informative parts of the movie where they're discussing like what's going on, it's again like really well done, and just keeps you engaged.
It's great to see the deterioration of man. That's kind of a theme of this movie, and just the paranoia that they all feel, where it's like, these guys work together and have been with each other for who knows how long. I don't know if it's ever explained, but you get them together and then they all start falling apart and not trusting one another, and they want to kill each other, which is crazy. So Bennings is what were you gonna say? Sorry.
On that note, one of my favorite scenes in the movie that illustrates that like descent into like chaos or like madness is when they go to talk to Blair after they shut him in the shed, and like they open the door and there's just a noose hanging next to him, and he's like, oh, I'm fine, I'm ready to come out now. And like it's really like off-putting because it's like, yeah, like, are you sure? Like that's not really the universal sign of I'm ready to come back to the team.
Oh yeah, and Blair has a freak out, but it's also he's kind of doing it for the stake of humanity.
But it's like the weight of the responsibility just like crushes him.
Yeah. So Bennings is the first one to get, I want to almost like Google a timeline of who gets infected. I've watched videos on this before, but Bennings is the first guy to get infected. And I wonder if there's like a trace of how they get infected and who gets infected. Because he's the first one where the dog from the beginning jumps up on him and starts licking him in the face. Mm-hmm. And he's the first one to get infected. Let me see.
Or at least the first one to get identified.
Yeah. Thing infected timeline.
It's like, that's like one of the other things that I think this movie does really well is you learn everything with the characters, and it really helps build the suspense throughout the movie. 'Cause like you learn actually pretty late in the movie that the alien is actually not like a single organism, and it's almost like infinitely replicatable.
Yeah.
Which then, like, if you go back and think like how many times they like blew people up into a bunch of different pieces and like chopped different people apart or whatever. Like there's a lot of potential infection points floating around this
Oh yeah.
camp. So yeah, it's the way they ratchet up the tension through information, give it like spoon fed to you is super cool.
Yeah. And it's what's crazy is when the thing does reveal itself, it's not just one entity; it's multiple entities. Especially that culminates at the end of the movie, which we'll get into. But it's like it's the perfect organism that's adopted all these and like evolved from all these different species. Like, and that's kind of what they had talks with behind the scenes. Is this thing's from outer space. It's probably interacted with other alien species that it's absorbed, and it's got that that level of knowledge, because when it infects people and replicates them, it knows their speech patterns, it knows their memories, it knows everything about them basically. So it absorbs all this information, which is super interesting and such a compelling villain, and like evil, evil entity, that it's mind blowing, the opportunity of storytelling for it.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I think one of the things that's also super, at least interesting to think about, is like, it's an organism and it's kind of amoral. Like in a lot of ways, like it's just trying to survive, same as the members of the crew, I think they even kind of say that at one point, that like this thing's just just trying to survive and make it out of the camp, and like it's just trying to get away from us,
It's
is
scared and
something
wants to
that
go home.
yeah, that's like
Like
somebody
E.T.
says that, yeah. But like it's a super interesting point that like it's not like the ultimate evil in the way that like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees or like, some of the other like supernatural kind of slasher icons are. Like it's just like another entity that's just trying to survive,
Yeah, pretty interesting.
It's a cool concept.
Definitely. Yeah, it's not just killing to kill.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so I pulled up somewhat of a timeline. It's hard to Googling it. I just want like a timeline where it's like, says this person, then this person, then this person. I'm sure that it's out there. I should have done the research beforehand. I apologize, but yeah, it shows Bennings is the first one. It's just confusing. I'm not even gonna fucking get into it. And it's apparently like debated who gets infected first, because you see the dog creep into a room with the shadow. Which shout out to that dog. That dog is an incredible actor, and they even talk about Jed is the dog's name. They talk about how well the dog acts. Like it pauses, it doesn't look at the camera, it goes into one room, stops, backs up, goes into the other room. Like super super good acting from the dog. Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. So well done. So yeah, you get Bennings getting infected, and you see it in the trailer with his hands like all extended, and he like makes that crazy like screaming noise, and then they torch him. I like that scene. That's kind of when the paranoia starts. There's a lot of there's so many flares in this movie. They're all holding flares. Those apparently only lasted 90 seconds, those flares.
Huh.
So they only had 1 minute and 30 seconds to film that. Then they had to relight them. Also, they're dripping hot, like, goo from the flare on them. So that was a point of contention and an issue that they had with filming. Also with lighting and holding it to, light their face, and that was all interesting. It's really well done how they do it, and the commentary really speaks to that, which was a cool perspective to watch on it and see kind of behind the scenes of, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and like the flare light also adds like that like unnatural kind of aspect to the scenes that are like in darkness, you know, like it's an unnatural light source and like everything looks like red and weird and like, you know, it adds to the like atmosphere of the movie in such a good way.
Oh yeah. And it's cool because, you know, each of the characters are doing something to, not all of them, but most of them are doing something to sabotage the camp, whether that's, you know, Blair with the radios and the blood and who did the blood, and then the power goes out, and that's why they need flares, and they need flares to light people on fire. There's just like their resources are slowly dwindling down because of the paranoia, and it makes for really good storytelling. I really enjoy that. And there's little things, little details that Carpenter does, like, which in the commentary, I always thought Norris, how he's like looking out the window and he's like, "Hey guys," and then he kind of like is like, "Oh," like in pain, and you think he's like the thing is him, and he's like getting absorbed. I always thought that. Apparently, he just has a heart condition. So, which is kind of makes even more sense now that I look at it, and I feel like I'm dumb for not realizing it, because they try and revive him.
Yeah, later, yeah.
Yeah, so which that scene is insane.
It's nuts.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You know, they try and revive him, and then his stomach opens up and bites Dr. Copper's arms off, which apparently that's a double amputee actor with Dr. Copper's face mask. There's a mask on him, which I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Pretty interesting. So and I want to read how it was created. The chest chomp effect was achieved with a hydraulic mechanism that snapped the cavity open and shut, sinking razor-sharp acrylic teeth into two brace-supported replica arms made of jello and gelatin blood tubes for flesh, and dental wax for bones. Double amputee Joe Corone, sporting a mask of actor Richard Dysart, who plays Dr. Copper, acted as a stand-in, pulling the false limbs back and providing one hell of a reaction shot. The creature's signature urethane tentacles were whipped from underneath the table by an operator, flicking horribly until small explosive charges send a geyser of green ichor, basically like KY jelly, soaring skyward. The stock creature is revealed, a suspended marionette operated by wires from above. Robert E. Worthington supervised the construction of 6 different stock thing heads, each with their own range of radio-controlled expressions. The heads were maneuvered through a hole in the false ceiling, sneakily hidden through camera placement. Fucking wild.
Yeah, it's nuts. that whole scene is crazy.
Yes.
Like it's
so
absolutely
chaotic.
Wild. Yeah.
So much happens then. There's what's crazy is like you said, there's, you know, people talk. There's these dialogue scenes where they're talking to figure out what happens, and then it's cultivated by action and chaos, and all like hell breaks loose and shit gets crazy, and that's definitely a scene of it. And then you've got Norris's head falling off,
tearing off.
Yeah, and I've got how that is explained too. And I apologize just that I'm reading from my other laptop here, but it's too good not to read. But apparently there's the crab legs that come out of the head too. That's remote controlled, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, crazy. Okay, so that shot of Norris's head descending onto the floor was done with gravity, and Norris's thing exploratory tongue whip was accomplished with a reverse action shot of retracted cables. The head pulling itself by its tongue involved operators hidden beneath the desk manipulating cables and translucent fishing line. The transformation where the head sprouts crab-like legs and exaggerated eye stalks took place on an elevated set with a phony floor, with operators below pushing everything up and out through the hollow head. Under the desk, screaming, the crab creature's mouth and limb movements were operated with remote controls and cables. The final beeline through the door consisted of a fake head mounted on a radio-controlled car. The creature's legs were fashioned out of thin aluminum tubes linked directly with the effects motor, which is to say, if the car sped up, so would the legs.
Oh my god, that's so cool.
So cool. Each leg was connected to camshafts, a machine element with linkages used to transform rotary motion into linear motion, which gave the impression of natural appendage movement.
Yeah, because the movement of that head is so like fluid and like as it's accurate crazy. As like something that fictional is going to look. Like it's incredibly well done. It's so cool.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's so well done. Again, why aren't movies doing stuff like this still? Like you got to learn from these effects guys.
I love after it runs through the door and Kurt Russell just looks at it, he's like, you gotta be kidding me.
So, what's his name says that? Kurt Russell doesn't say that. He doesn't? No, is it the guy with the curlyish hair?
Start with an S?
Fuchs? No, it's not
Fuchs.
Fuchs.
No,
it's not Fuchs. It's Palmer. Palmer.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
Palmer.
yeah.
He says, "You've got to be fucking kidding me," and that's Kurt Russell's favorite line. He laughs every time he hears it, and in the commentary, he like laughs his ass off during it, which is funny.
It's so good, and like it's such a well placed like comedic moment after all of that like total like batshit crazy stuff, and then he just torches the shit out of it. It's just like it's a great little moment that like breaks up like how heavy everything is,
and there's not many of them.
Yeah, and like it resets you a little bit for the rest of the movie, which is again like very bleak and
yeah, because there's very few comedic lines in here. Like that's one of them, and then oh yeah, fuck you too from Kurt Russell at the end, which is an awesome line. So there's not a bunch of comedy in this movie at all.
No, and it's I think it does itself a great service by limiting that, because it keeps what otherwise would be a wacky movie very serious.
Yeah. And then again you get to the scene where everyone's freaking out and they want to do the blood test. Clark doesn't want that. Kurt Russell shoots him in the head, which is crazy. That's the only God, I keep hitting my table, sorry. That's the only death in the movie caused by another human. Human to human death, which is crazy.
The only homicide.
Actually, I take that back because that's what I read, which I feel like that's wrong because
the Norwegian guy gets shot, but whatever.
Yeah,
doesn't
interesting. I guess during the Thing encounter, I mean it's in the American camp, which still is the Norwegians there too. So I take that back, I guess. But I read that, so I gotta fact check that better.
Maybe the only unwarranted killing in the movie.
Yes, that's better. Maybe that's what it was.
That's the better qualifier.
Yes. The blood test is really cool. Sorry, go on.
That scene, just real quick, again, is so intelligent.
The blood test?
Yeah. Speaks so well to the characterization that we talked about earlier, that these guys are smart and they're not just like dipshits that are caught in this thing. Like they know what they're doing. And it's such a cool concept on how to test for who's infected, besides because in another situation, I don't even know if testing would even come into a normal horror character's mind, it's just such a cool, it's a cool scene in a horror movie. It's just so atypical.
The only qualm I have with that, and maybe it's explained somewhere, is they cut their fingers and then they just wipe the blade on their pants, and it's wouldn't that cause cross contamination? with like say the
could,
thing.
yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the only thing. Because for example, I think the reason Blair gets infected is when he is inspecting and like dissecting the thing. He like he's like got a pencil and he's pointing at it, and then he puts the pencil in his mouth. So I think
Oh.
that's how he gets infected. Personally, it's possible. Or since he's in that shed, you know, I hear things at night. I'm
Yeah.
scared. You
Well,
know?
there's a whole fucking like ice cave below that thing where there's like a
but
spaceship.
he creates that.
After he's infected, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and the blood test, that's a fake hand. That one that Kurt Russell's holding with the blood, you can tell it's a fake hand, and it's kind of funny. And they tell you in the commentary it's a fake hand. There's also a scene with another fake hand that's pretty funny. It's Childs, who's played by Keith David. He apparently broke his hand in real life and had a fake, like he had a cast on, and they put like a rubber hand over it and painted it, and you could tell it's in the scene where Blair is trashing the camp and like sabotaging the radios and stuff. You could see his hand is like blown up. It's kind of funny. And I didn't realize that until watching the commentary, and they say that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the blood test, it reveals that Palmer is the thing, but you can kind of tell with the reaction shots where Palmer is also, he's kind of like avoiding eye contact with everyone. You kind of like, you're like, what's up with him? And having seen the movie prior, it's like, it kind of gives it away a little bit more, which I like. And then, he starts shaking on the couch.
I do like how everyone is a little nervous during it, like, because it starts to show that like they're not even sure anymore. Like if they're even real, it's a cool sequence.
Oh yeah, definitely. It adds to the paranoia too, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Palmer turning into the thing and basically opening its head like a flower again and basically eating Windows's head.
Yeah.
And then throws him against the wall, and then Windows starts turning into it, and they Kurt Russell flamethrowers. That whole scene with him just like trying to ignite the flamethrower is intense and adds to the intensity of the scene. But yeah, when he goes to flamethrower Windows against who's against the wall, there's apparently guys on the other side using like mechanical rods to push his arms and legs, and he's like struggling. And so like they lit that wall up, and like the people behind that wall got pretty toasty apparently. They were definitely hot. A lot of people die in that scene, I feel like.
Yeah. You guys, we already talked about what's his face gets shot by Kurt Russell.
Clark, yep. Palmer,
Windows dies.
Windows,
Palmer
three
dies.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they decide to destroy the camp, and blow everything up, which is cool. I like that they thought Kurt Russell was the thing. I like that because Kurt Russell's the main character. He's the hero of the story, and you want him to not be the thing, but then you get paranoia thinking he is.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I love that aspect. Again, it adds to the element of surprise and suspense, and it's good storytelling, and it makes you question everyone. Not everyone is safe, and that is the epitome of the movie, which is genius.
Yeah, but I do like how they justify that he's not the thing, because they're like, well, he just wasted those guys who were things like without hesitation. So like, if this thing is really like, or you can guess that it's like somehow connected to itself, even when it's like, in multiple places or multiple copies. Because when he triggers the blood, it causes Palmer to start like convulsing, So there's like some kind of connection.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I mean, it's cool that like they they clearly like spent a lot of time thinking through the mechanics of like how the alien operates, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's
like
good writing.
justifies why someone would not be infected, you know, like which is you know, cool and helps like close up plot holes, you know.
Yeah, definitely. So the ending scene, basically, or the towards the ending of the climactic fight, if you will, with the Blair thing. So Blair is revealed to be creating that ship to try and get out of there, and they have to blow it up. And you've got the other guy, Gary. You've got Gary, and then
Childs.
no, Childs is
Or
like
Childs
missing.
runs away, yeah.
Yeah, it's Knowles, and
Gary.
and Gary. And Gary gets this like face, like a fingers in the face, which is creepy.
Yeah.
And
That
then,
is a cool special effect too.
yeah. And then you get the culmination of basically everyone in this giant thing, which is again genius writing of all these people combined. Which you've got like Blair on the right side of the thing's face, you've got the dog, you've got everything. And I like that he blows it up and you kill the monster, and then you get Kurt Russell at the end and Childs coming back, and you still have that paranoia of are they who they say they are. And I mean, you've got apparently Kurt Russell came up with the final line of "Let's just sit around here, see what happens," which is so awesome. And then the score kicks on, and that's such an awesome ending. But it is divisive and controversial. Again, it's not a happy ending, and there's no definitive answer. Like Blade Runner, do we know if Deckard's a replicant or not? We don't. Do we know if McCready or Childs are the thing? We don't. And I like endings like that where it's just like, oh fuck, like it's so entertaining, and it pisses you off a little bit because you want to know, but then again, it's like good filmmaking because it makes you talk about it and it makes you want to watch it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with the end of Halloween where she looks out the window, Michael Myers' body's laying there, looks away, looks back, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And cue the theme song, cut to black. You know,
Yeah.
like, that's how like you end a good horror movie. Is there's
yeah.
always like a little bit of doubt, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the thing's still lurking in the shadows. Which I want to ask, it's kind of like Blade Runner, whether you think he's a replicant or not. Do you think Childs or McCready are the thing?
McCready, no. Because he's fresh off of blowing up Blair.
Yeah.
Childs is up for debate.
Suspect. He's suspect.
Very suspect. Because he's missing for the entire end sequence of the movie, basically. With no clue about like what he was doing at all. So, yeah, it's not it's not looking good for him. Or McCready for that matter.
Yeah.
Like either way though, it's like they're both toast, like regardless of
Yes.
whether they're the thing or not. Like,
Yeah.
you know, they're both gonna freeze to death,
Yeah. So it doesn't
or
really
the
matter.
thing is gonna freeze, and you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's but it's like yeah, it leaves that little window for the potential that the thing can find its way, you know,
Yeah.
out of there, you know.
Yeah.
Which yeah is just it's good horror writing.
100%. 100%. So John Carpenter has gone on record and flip-flopped his "is it or is it not." He responded that he never understood how there could be any confusion about whether Childs or McCready are human or not, because the last scene shows Kurt Russell and Keith David staring each other down, harshly backlit. It's completely glaringly obvious that Kurt Russell is breathing and Keith David is not. That's what he said.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then there was one other where he basically said, no, none of them are the alien or the thing. So he's kind of gone on record not. But because, yeah, there's a theory that I have that I found. Many people have theorized about the film's ambiguous ending, with people debating over whether Childs is a thing or not. The most popular piece of evidence is the bottle of scotch MacReady hands Childs at the end. MacReady had been throwing Molotov cocktails throughout the camp earlier, and it's said that this bottle is filled with gasoline as well. So, the thing, not knowing what alcohol tastes like, drinks it while Childs would have spat it out. Going further, the music swells as Child drinks, the music having been the indicator of the things present throughout the rest of the film. Exhausted and having already accepted his fate, MacReady watches the camp burn, unable to fight. Pretty interesting. Detractors of this theory point out in the 2011 prequel, which we need to talk about briefly, which says the thing cannot recreate inorganic material such as rings and nose rings and stuff like that, which they may have changed that, but Carpenter acknowledged this theory, with most saying that he does not believe either of them are a thing at the end of the film, though some have reported otherwise. Like I said, he thinks Childs is not breathing. Whichever side you choose to believe, the ending's pretty bleak either way.
Yeah. It's like one of the things that I thought about with particularly around the bottle of whiskey is that like they got such a major reaction just from like heating a wire up and putting it in blood. I would think that like drinking alcohol, which alcohol is more or less poison, would also trigger it.
Yeah. Fair.
And Childs drinks it without a problem. So that could be evidence that he's, a human.
Yeah.
Depends on how detail oriented they were.
I know. But I definitely don't think MacReady is the thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Childs
not
is
MacReady.
questionable, but like you said, it's like they're not going to do anything about it anyway. They can't. They're going to freeze to death.
Yeah.
But apparently multiple alternate endings were filmed. One ending cut to some time later where MacReady had been rescued to civilization and passes a blood test from a mysterious government agent who knew about the thing originally, which is pretty interesting. That one was filmed just for precaution, but never used. Even for test screenings, John Carpenter wanted a more upbeat conclusion in case the studio rejected the film's pessimistic ending. Another filming showed a Malamute, so the dog, presumably the thing, surviving the explosion, stopping to take one final look back at the burning camp before running off into the snow, which is fucking awesome, if you ask me.
That would be a good one too, yeah.
The third ending simply shows Childs getting up and walking away into the storm, leaving MacReady to perish alone. Again, those endings were never used. There was also some purposed endings that went unfilmed, including a final climactic showdown between MacReady and Childs, a rescue helicopter arriving just in time to save them, and the two men committing suicide with one final stick of dynamite. Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I like the dog. The dog one the best.
The
would
dog
be cool,
one's
but
like the best of the alternate.
agreed.
Yeah.
But this ending is pretty awesome. It's bleak, like we said. And it's just, it's badass though. It's still badass. Just because, Kurt Russell, I love Kurt Russell. I think he's an awesome actor. I love him in pretty much every movie I've ever seen him in. Especially in the 80s and 90s. He's great. There's a little thriller I just watched, which I grew up on, called Breakdown. I think I've even mentioned it to you to watch it. It's a fun little thriller from like 94 or 97 or something like that. It's in that range, and it's super good. You should check it out, and our viewers should check it out if you haven't seen it. But there is a prequel that was made. Did you ever see the prequel? Did we see it together?
I think I watched it once.
Okay.
Like, definitely after I watched the original, though.
Yeah. It's not very good, but there's a lot of behind-the-scenes drama for that they did it with practical effects to, honor the original, or, well, technically not the original, to honor Carpenter's The Thing. And the studio hated the look of them. They thought that it looked too fake, so they painted over it with CGI. And the CGI looks like The Rock from The Scorpion King in like
Yeah.
2001. So it was pretty bad, and the movie got panned because of it. So it'd be cool if they went back and restored that. But yeah, the movie's not great. I haven't watched it in a long time. Maybe it's worth a rewatch. But this movie is a classic. It holds up super well. It's one of my favorite 80s movies. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time, especially from the 80s. And it's, we're in October now. We're in spooky season, so I think it's a great first film to do, which I will be releasing the schedule probably even prior to this airing. I'll be releasing the schedule. We're going to do that from now on, so you guys can watch along with us, or watch before we do this and then listen along. So, yeah, I mean, any final thoughts you got, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I wanted to touch on that I've heard before, that I'm curious if you came across either in the commentary or in any of your research. I'm not sure if it pertains to Carpenter's version or the original from the 50s, but I've heard that The Thing is like an allegory for communism.
Oh,
And that
interesting.
the alien
could
is
see
like
that.
communist thought infecting the crew, and you don't know who's a communist and who isn't because communists look like people too, kind of thing. Which,
Yeah.
1982, we're in the heat of the Cold War. It's a pretty at the forefront of everyone's minds at that point.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting theory. I don't know if you had come across anything or not about that.
I hadn't for that particular euphemism or like allegory. I could see it more for the 50s film. What was it where they like blacklisted people in Hollywood in like the 50s?
Yeah.
So I could see that being for the thing from another world. This one was more like it had more of an allegory to AIDS, the AIDS epidemic, with AIDS kind of being like you didn't know who was infected, and it could be anyone, and it's an unseen, thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I hadn't heard about the communism one, but I'm guessing the thing from another world is that.
Yeah, the one from the 50s would be more fitting for that, I would think.
Yeah, with the Red Scare and everything. And
yeah. Yeah, I've always thought that was an interesting idea. Like, this movie's ripe for, metaphor and stuff. The way it kind of plays out, so...
Yeah, I just Googled it. It's definitely the thing from another world from 51 is often interpreted as a Cold War allegory about communism and McCarthyism. So yeah,
Okay.
It's the 50s version for sure. And then the 80s version is more AIDS. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's...
On that note...
Yeah. Yeah, thank you guys for listening. And we're going to have more horror movies this month, all from John Carpenter. Some we have seen, some we haven't. And I'm looking forward to all of them. So hopefully you guys are too. And like I said, we'll be releasing the schedule each month so you guys know what we're watching a little bit ahead of time so you can jump on that and do your homework.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited because I think this is the only one of the movies that I've seen this month.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this would be a good one.
Good. Yeah, there's two I haven't seen, which I'm excited for. So, yeah, we're looking forward to it, and we're ready for spooky season. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yep. See ya.